Good morning. It is Wednesday, March 17th. I'm Jason Stanton. I serve as senior pastor at First Lutheran in Onalaska, Wisconsin. This is my musing today. I continue to muse on our Lenten devotional that we're using at First Lutheran again and again, a Lenten refrain. I'm reading from page 28, which is centered around John 3:14 to 21. The Reverend Lyle Gwynn Garrity is the one who wrote this devotion that I'm just going to read a couple paragraphs of. She's speaking to Jesus appearing to Nicodemus, or I should say Nicodemus appearing to Jesus, to have a conversation in the middle of the night about why he came, what's going on. This is when Jesus famously says, "For God so loved the world that he gave his only Son." She says, "I wonder why Nicodemus came to Jesus in the first place. Had Jesus' teachings uprooted his religious self-image? One carefully curated to project propriety and adherence to the law? Or had death recently left a sharp sting, unraveling his tidy beliefs, creating in him a well of desperate questions about eternal life?" Jesus responds to him with poetry of promise. What a great phrase. God didn't send his Son to judge the world, but so the world might be restored through him. For God so loved. For God so loves that, like light, God keeps traveling to reach us with that redeeming love. And then she refers to this painting that I think she made. Yeah, she made. And she's thinking about, she says, in this abstract painting, the golden leaf marks become like a wave gliding through the cosmos, moving endlessly until it reaches everything. That sparked my imagination. A few of those phrases and words made me muse. Think a little bit here. Religious self-image is one of the things I was thinking about. Nicodemus has a self-image, a religious self-image. And I thought, what is my religious self-image? What was it when I was in confirmation or in high school, or as I was pursuing the idea that I would be a pastor? Like, what kind of self-image do you have to have in order to think, yeah, I should wear a collar. I should be associated with the church. I should be the one in front of hundreds of people telling them stories about God. Like, what kind of self-image does it take to get there? And I think it's less of a self-image that got me here than my understanding of God's image of me. If I thought that I should be up front, I don't know that maybe Lutheran isn't the right denomination for me. Anyway, so I was thinking about my religious self-image. I've always tried to think of myself as God-pleasing, as much as I, for good and for bad, am a people pleaser. I think that's kind of how I am with God too. Like, I don't want to do things that make God sad. Of course I do, but I've always wanted to be a good boy, be a good person, and as I've obviously grown older, be a good husband, be a good dad. Lately, what does it mean to be good has turned into be a good child of God. And instead of answering that question of, well, what does a good child of God do? What does a good child of God say or think? What it's meant to me lately, and by that I mean the last couple of years, but especially in this COVID time, is being a good child of God means being a good neighbor. I mean, that's always been a part of it, right? At least for me, when Jesus says to the rich young man who asks, how do I get in? How do I inherit eternal life? And Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan and be a good neighbor, So does being a good neighbor mean I need to have answers for my neighbors? Like, hey, I'm the source of all wisdom right over here because I'm wearing one of these. So y'all should listen to me because, I am wearing one of these. There's a lot of pastor clergy types that think this is just license to have answers. Or does being a good neighbor for me mean keep living into questions about God, about us, about our relationship with God. Those seem to be two of the primary ways to respond to the question of what is a good neighbor? How do I act like a good neighbor? Does it mean I have answers, or that I am wrestling with questions? And it seems like the answers angle requires me to first arrive at certainty for myself. Like, well, I have gone through all the possibilities, and here are the answers, and now come to me because I got answers for you, neighbor. Or do I, in conversations with neighbors, sit with their questions with them? Living into questions is more about staying uncertain. And does uncertainty serve my neighbor? And at times my neighbor wants more than uncertainty. But what I thought about here was living into questions, sitting with questions with my neighbor. That keeps me curious. Me being curious, I think, serves my neighbor. Because then I'll ask my neighbor more questions instead of just trying to get to the answer. I'll imagine my neighbor's experience instead of just assuming what their experience is because I already have the answer. I'll wonder how to connect what it is they're questioning or what their experience was with maybe some other questions and experiences I heard from this other neighbor. And making those connections a lot of times makes more sense of our experience than simply throwing answers at people. I'm not saying answers are like the enemy, but they oftentimes cut off dialogue rather than open it up. They oftentimes separate and divide me against my neighbor more than if I just remain curious and ask more questions. And all of that, what I just said, curiosity feels to me more like light than answers do. Answers don't feel like light to me. Curiosity seems to be like light, going as fast as it can. I mean, light is the fastest physical thing we know of. And it goes everywhere, all at once. And that's kind of how curiosity is. When we're really curious about our neighbor or anything else, about God, it's like all of our questions just expand out of us like a big bang of curiosity all at once, as fast as God has created anything. So I feel like curiosity is like light. So be curious today as we keep faith alive.